The invitation arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and if Charlotte Bennet had listened to her first instinct, she would have thrown it straight into the trash. Years later, she would remember one sentence more clearly than anything else: sometimes the people who want to embarrass you the most are the same people who accidentally hand you your greatest opportunity. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with the gold crest of the Carter Foundation. Charlotte stared at it across her kitchen counter for nearly 10 minutes before finally opening it. She had not heard from anyone connected to Ryan Carter in almost 3 years. 3 years since the divorce. 3 years since the whispers. 3 years since people had quietly decided that Ryan had won and Charlotte had disappeared. The invitation was formal, polished, and surprisingly warm. She was cordially invited to attend the annual Carter Foundation Gala, one of the most exclusive charity events in New York City. Politicians attended. CEOs attended. Celebrities attended. The kind of event where a single conversation could change someone's career. Charlotte read the card twice. Then she noticed a handwritten note at the bottom. "Your presence is highly requested." No signature. No explanation. Just those 4 words. Her phone buzzed before she could think much about it. It was her friend Melissa. When Charlotte mentioned the invitation, Melissa almost laughed. "You're not seriously considering going, are you?" Charlotte walked to the window and looked out at the rain sliding down the glass. "I haven't decided." "Charlotte, come on. Ryan will be there. Vanessa will be there. Half the people at that gala spent years treating you like you didn't belong. Why would you put yourself through that?" It was a fair question. Ryan Carter had once been her husband. Back then, they had attended galas together, smiling for photographs and shaking hands with donors. But after the divorce, the story everyone preferred was simple. Ryan had moved on. Charlotte had faded away. At least, that was what they believed. She could already imagine the look she would receive walking into that ballroom alone. The quiet curiosity. The fake sympathy. The subtle judgment disguised as concern. Yet something about the invitation bothered her. Not in a bad way. In a strange way. The note felt intentional. "Your presence is highly requested." Requested by whom? And why now? She folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. That evening she opened her laptop and searched for information about the gala. Ryan's name appeared everywhere. So did Vanessa Brooks, now officially listed as a member of the Foundation's executive committee. Charlotte felt no anger reading it. No heartbreak. Those emotions belonged to another version of herself. A version that no longer existed. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was waiting for her behind those ballroom doors. The next morning, after a long walk through Central Park, she made her decision. She would attend. Not because she wanted to see Ryan. Not because she cared what anyone thought. But because for the first time in years, she felt genuinely curious. And sometimes curiosity changes everything. For most people in New York society, Charlotte Bennet had become a forgotten chapter. That was exactly how Ryan Carter preferred it. On the top floor of Carter Foundation headquarters overlooking Manhattan, Ryan stood beside the conference room windows reviewing final preparations for the gala. The event was only 4 days away, and every major detail had already been approved. Sponsors had confirmed attendance. Press coverage was secured. Guest lists were finalized. Everything was under control. At least until Vanessa Brooks walked into the room holding a tablet and an amused smile. "You will never guess who accepted the invitation," she said. Ryan barely looked up. "Who?" Vanessa placed the tablet in front of him. Charlotte's name appeared on the screen. For a brief moment, Ryan felt something he could not immediately identify. Surprise. Curiosity. Maybe even discomfort. Then it disappeared. "Interesting," he said casually. Vanessa laughed. "Interesting? Ryan, this is perfect." He leaned back in his chair. What exactly is perfect about it? Vanessa crossed her arms. Everyone thinks she vanished. Nobody has seen her at an event like this in years. Do you know what people will be talking about all night? Ryan said nothing. Vanessa continued. They will be comparing us. They will see what happened after the divorce. They will see who moved forward and who did not. Ryan still did not respond. Deep down, something about the situation felt strange. Charlotte had never enjoyed these events. Even during their marriage, she preferred quiet evenings over crowded ballrooms. The fact that she had accepted raised questions. But Vanessa interpreted her attendance differently. To her, Charlotte was walking directly into a trap. Later that afternoon, Vanessa met with several members of the planning committee. She suggested seating adjustments. She suggested small changes to the guest arrangements. Every recommendation sounded harmless when presented professionally. In reality, each decision pushed Charlotte farther from the center of the room and closer to the edges. Far from influential guests. Far from cameras. Far from attention. By the end of the meeting, Vanessa felt satisfied. If Charlotte wanted to attend, she would attend as a spectator. Nothing more. Meanwhile, across the city, Charlotte sat inside a quiet coffee shop near Madison Avenue reviewing documents on her laptop. She was not thinking about Ryan. She was not thinking about Vanessa. Most of her attention remained focused on a series of meetings scheduled for the following week. Yet every so often her eyes drifted toward the invitation resting beside her coffee cup. The handwritten note continued to bother her. Your presence is highly requested. She had contacted the foundation 2 days earlier seeking clarification. The response had been polite but unhelpful. The invitation had been confirmed. No additional information had been provided. As she closed her laptop, a man in an expensive suit entered the coffee shop. Charlotte noticed him immediately. He noticed her too. Their eyes met briefly. To her surprise, the man smiled respectfully and nodded before taking a seat across the room. Charlotte recognized him. He was the chief executive officer of a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Years ago he would not have known her name. Yet somehow he seemed genuinely pleased to see her. Before leaving, he approached her table. Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett, he said warmly. I look forward to seeing you at the gala. Charlotte froze for a second. She had never spoken to him before. Thank you, she replied carefully. The executive smiled again and walked away. Charlotte watched him leave, feeling the same strange sensation she had experienced since receiving the invitation. It was as if pieces of a puzzle were slowly moving into place while she remained the only person who could not yet see the full picture. The night of the gala arrived with clear skies and a cool Manhattan breeze drifting between the towers of Midtown. Long before the first guests stepped onto the red carpet, photographers had already gathered outside the Grand Lexington Ballroom, waiting for politicians, celebrities, and business leaders to arrive. Inside, crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous hall, casting warm reflections across polished marble floors and elegant gold accents. Everything had been designed to impress. Vanessa Brooks stood near the entrance reviewing final details with event staff. She wore a confident smile as she watched influential guests fill the room. Every conversation, every introduction, every camera flash seemed to confirm that the evening belonged to her and Ryan. When Ryan arrived, several board members immediately approached him. Handshakes, congratulations, and polite compliments followed him wherever he went. From a distance, it looked like the perfect picture of success. Yet despite the activity surrounding him, Ryan found himself occasionally glancing toward the entrance. He told himself it meant nothing. Still, he kept looking. Nearly 40 minutes after the gala officially began, a black sedan quietly pulled up outside the ballroom. No crowd gathered. No photographers rushed forward. Charlotte Bennett stepped out alone. Her dress was elegant but understated, deep navy blue with simple lines and no extravagant jewelry. She carried herself with calm confidence, attracting attention not because she demanded it but because she seemed completely comfortable without it. As she entered the ballroom, several nearby conversations slowed. Some guests recognized her immediately. Others needed a few seconds before the memory returned. Charlotte Bennett. Ryan Carter's former wife. The woman nobody had seen at major social events in years. She felt the stares almost instantly. Some were curious. Some were sympathetic. Others were openly judgmental. Charlotte expected all of it. What surprised her was something else entirely. A middle-aged executive standing near the bar suddenly stopped speaking in the middle of a conversation. His expression brightened. He excused himself from his group and walked directly toward her. "Ms. Bennett," he said warmly. "It is wonderful to finally see you again." Charlotte recognized him as the chairman of a large investment firm. Before she could respond, another executive approached. Then another. Within minutes, several influential guests had greeted her with surprising enthusiasm. None of them stayed long enough to explain why they seemed to know her. Each exchange left Charlotte more confused than before. Across the room, Vanessa noticed the interactions immediately. Her smile faded. "Do you see that?" she quietly asked Ryan. Ryan followed her gaze. Charlotte stood near one of the ballroom columns speaking briefly with a group of executives. The scene made no sense. "Maybe they remember her from before," Ryan said. Vanessa shook her head. "No. Something is different." Still determined to control the evening, Vanessa approached an event coordinator and confirmed Charlotte's table assignment. It was exactly where she wanted it. Near the back of the ballroom. Far from the stage. Far from the foundation leadership. Far from anyone important. Satisfied, she returned to Ryan. Neither of them noticed several powerful guests continuing to glance toward Charlotte throughout the evening. And neither of them noticed that some of those same people seemed far more interested in her arrival than in the gala itself. Charlotte remained polite through every conversation, but the strange feeling that had followed her for days continued growing stronger. One executive after another greeted her with unexpected respect. None of them explained why. None of them stayed long enough to answer her questions. It was as if everyone knew something she did not. Eventually she made her way to the table listed on her place card. The location immediately told her everything she needed to know. It sat near the rear corner of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a decorative arrangement of white orchids. From there, the stage looked distant, and most of the influential guests were seated dozens of feet away. Charlotte looked at the card, smiled faintly, and took her seat. The placement did not surprise her. Across the room, Vanessa noticed Charlotte sitting exactly where she had intended. Satisfied, she picked up a glass of sparkling water and headed in her direction. Ryan followed several steps behind, not because he wanted confrontation, but because he sensed that Vanessa was about to create one. As Vanessa approached the table, nearby guests quietly turned their attention toward the scene. Social events like this always attracted spectators when former spouses occupied the same room. "Charlotte," Vanessa said with a bright smile that felt carefully rehearsed. "I am so glad you decided to come." Charlotte looked up calmly. "Thank you. It is a beautiful event." Vanessa glanced around the table. "I hope the seating arrangement is comfortable. I know these events can be overwhelming when you do not attend them often anymore." The comment sounded innocent on the surface, but the meaning underneath was obvious. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Charlotte simply nodded. "I am sure I will manage." Vanessa's smile tightened slightly. The response was not giving her what she wanted. Ryan finally stepped forward. For the first time that evening, he and Charlotte stood face to face. 3 years had passed since their divorce, yet the moment felt strangely ordinary. There was no anger in Charlotte's expression. No bitterness. If anything, she seemed completely at peace. That realization unsettled Ryan more than he expected. "You look well," he said. "Thank you," Charlotte replied. So do you. An awkward silence followed. Vanessa quickly stepped back into the conversation. Everyone has been wondering what you have been doing these past few years. Her tone remained pleasant, but her eyes revealed the real intention. You disappeared so suddenly. Charlotte held her gaze. I have been busy. Vanessa laughed softly. Busy is a very mysterious answer. A few nearby guests chuckled. Others looked away. The conversation was beginning to feel uncomfortable. Yet Charlotte refused to show embarrassment. She simply smiled. Some opportunities are easier to discuss after they are finished. The answer caught Vanessa off guard. Before she could respond, another guest approached Charlotte's table. Then another. Each greeted her warmly. One even apologized for interrupting before asking if they could speak with her later in the evening. Vanessa watched the exchange with growing frustration. Ryan noticed it too. More importantly, he noticed something else. These were not random attendees. They were people whose schedules were worth millions of dollars. People who rarely approached anyone without a reason. And for reasons he could not explain, they all seemed unusually interested in Charlotte. The rest of the evening should have reassured Vanessa that everything remained under control, but instead every passing minute made her more uneasy. Charlotte was still seated at one of the least desirable tables in the ballroom, yet somehow influential people continued finding reasons to approach her. None of them stayed long. Most exchanged only a few words before moving on. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Vanessa finally leaned toward Ryan. Something is going on. Ryan kept his eyes on Charlotte across the room. I noticed. Then why does nobody seem concerned? Vanessa asked. These people act like they know her. Ryan did not answer immediately because he had been asking himself the same question. During their marriage, Charlotte had always been intelligent and capable, but she had never sought attention. She preferred working quietly behind the scenes. After the divorce, he assumed she had moved on to a simpler life away from public events and corporate circles. Tonight was challenging that assumption. A few minutes later, dinner service began. Conversations filled the ballroom while servers moved gracefully between tables. Charlotte remained calm, speaking politely with those around her. She noticed occasional glances from Ryan and Vanessa but chose not to acknowledge them. She had promised herself long ago that she would never measure her worth through their opinions again. Yet the mystery surrounding the evening continued growing. Another executive stopped by her table. This one she recognized immediately. He managed one of the largest private investment groups in the country. Ms. Bennett, he said quietly. I wanted to personally congratulate you. Charlotte blinked. Congratulate me for what? The man looked surprised. Then he quickly smiled. My apologies. I assumed you already knew. Before Charlotte could ask another question, someone called his name from across the room. He excused himself and disappeared into the crowd. Charlotte sat back in her chair, more confused than ever. Already knew what? Across the ballroom, Vanessa had witnessed the exchange. Her patience was running out. She stood and walked directly toward Charlotte's table once again. Several nearby guests immediately sensed tension and fell silent. Vanessa stopped beside Charlotte and offered another polished smile. I hope you are enjoying yourself. I am, Charlotte replied. Thank you. Vanessa nodded. That is good to hear. I was worried this evening might feel uncomfortable considering how much has changed. Charlotte met her gaze. Change is not always a bad thing. The answer sounded simple, yet something about the confidence behind it irritated Vanessa. She decided to push harder. I suppose that depends on the outcome, Vanessa said. Some people move forward. Others spend years trying to recover. The nearby guests became noticeably uncomfortable. Even Ryan looked annoyed by the comment. Charlotte, however, remained completely composed. She lifted her glass and took a small sip of water before responding. Life has a way of surprising people, she said. Sometimes the story is much bigger than it appears. Vanessa opened her mouth to reply, but before she could speak, the ballroom lights suddenly dimmed. Conversation stopped almost instantly. The large screens beside the stage illuminated. Event staff began moving toward their assigned positions. The formal program was about to begin. As guests turned their attention toward the stage, Charlotte felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. She still did not know why she had been specifically requested to attend. She still did not understand why powerful strangers kept treating her with unusual respect. But for the first time all evening, she had the unmistakable feeling that answers were finally approaching. The room gradually fell silent as Jonathan Hayes stepped onto the stage. As chairman of the Carter Foundation and one of the most respected figures in the nonprofit world, he commanded attention without effort. Guests straightened in their seats. Conversations faded. Even the waitstaff paused along the edges of the ballroom. Jonathan smiled warmly as the spotlight settled on him. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another remarkable year." Polite applause echoed through the hall. Charlotte listened carefully from her table near the back. For reasons she could not explain, her heartbeat seemed slightly faster than before. Jonathan began reviewing the foundation's achievements over the past year. Donations had increased. New community programs had launched. Partnerships had expanded across several states. The audience responded with occasional applause as photographs and statistics appeared on the large screens behind him. Ryan looked relaxed again. This was familiar territory. These presentations happened every year. Whatever strange feeling had lingered throughout the evening seemed less important now. Vanessa appeared equally confident. She sat with perfect posture, occasionally smiling toward photographers positioned near the stage. Yet Jonathan's presentation soon began moving in an unexpected direction. None of these accomplishments, he continued, would have been possible without the support of several extraordinary individuals. Images of donors appeared on the screens. Names were announced. Applause followed each recognition. Charlotte watched politely along with everyone else. Then Jonathan paused. A subtle change moved through his expression. It was small but noticeable. Several executives seated near the front exchanged knowing looks. Charlotte immediately recognized some of them as the same people who had approached her earlier. Once again, that strange feeling returned. Jonathan looked down at a card in his hand before raising his eyes toward the audience. "Tonight," he said, "there is one person whose contribution deserves special recognition." The ballroom grew quieter. Ryan leaned slightly forward in his chair. Vanessa crossed her arms confidently, clearly expecting another major donor to be introduced. Jonathan continued. "For years, this individual has preferred privacy over publicity. Recognition has never been the goal. Impact has always mattered more." Charlotte felt her attention sharpen. Around the room, several influential guests were no longer watching the stage. They were looking elsewhere. Looking toward her. A knot formed in her stomach. Jonathan smiled. Many people in this room know the results of this person's work. Very few know the full story. The silence became almost complete. Even Ryan noticed the unusual reaction spreading through the audience. One by one, several executives turned their chairs slightly. Their focus remained fixed on Charlotte's table. Vanessa noticed it too. Confusion appeared on her face for the first time all evening. Jonathan unfolded the card completely. "Some achievements deserve acknowledgement," he said. "Some contributions deserve gratitude." He paused once more, allowing the anticipation to build across the room. Charlotte suddenly remembered the handwritten message at the bottom of her invitation. "Your presence is highly requested." For the first time, she wondered if the note had not been a request at all. Perhaps it had been a warning that this evening was never going to unfold the way anyone expected. Jonathan lifted his gaze and looked directly toward the back of the ballroom. The spotlight operators immediately adjusted their position. A narrow beam of light slowly began moving across the crowd. Guests followed it instinctively. Hundreds of eyes turned in the same direction. And then the light stopped exactly where Charlotte Bennett was sitting. Charlotte froze as the spotlight settled on her table. For a second, she wondered whether there had been some kind of mistake. Around her, hundreds of guests turned to look in the same direction. Conversations vanished. The ballroom felt suspended in silence. Jonathan Hayes smiled from the stage. Please join me in recognizing a woman whose generosity has changed thousands of lives while asking for absolutely nothing in return. Charlotte remained seated, her expression calm despite the shock building inside her. Vanessa stared across the room in disbelief. Ryan looked equally confused. Neither of them understood what was happening. Jonathan continued. 3 years ago, when several important community programs faced closure due to funding shortages, one individual stepped forward quietly and made certain those programs survived. Murmurs spread through the audience. Several board members nodded knowingly. Others smiled. Ryan glanced toward the foundation executives seated near the stage. Their reactions suggested they already knew what was coming. Jonathan raised the card in his hand. For years, she requested complete anonymity. No interviews. No publicity. No recognition. Charlotte's heart pounded harder. Suddenly every strange conversation from the evening began replaying in her mind. The executives who seemed pleased to see her. The unexpected congratulations. The respectful greetings. The mysterious invitation. The handwritten note. It all started making sense. Jonathan finally spoke the name everyone had been waiting to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, please recognize Ms. Charlotte Bennett. The reaction was immediate. Applause erupted throughout the ballroom. Not polite applause. Genuine applause. Guests stood from their seats one after another. Several influential executives rose first, followed by board members, donors, and eventually much of the room. Charlotte sat motionless for a moment, stunned by what she was witnessing. Vanessa's face lost all color. Ryan could barely process what was happening. The woman he believed had disappeared from this world was now receiving a standing ovation from some of the most powerful people in the room. Jonathan motioned toward Charlotte. Ms. Bennett, would you please join me on stage? Every eye followed her as she slowly stood. The same ballroom that had viewed her as an afterthought less than an hour earlier now watched her with admiration. Charlotte walked toward the stage with measured confidence. She did not rush. She did not look toward Ryan or Vanessa. She simply moved forward. As she approached, Jonathan stepped down to greet her personally. The gesture surprised many guests. Men in his position rarely left the stage for anyone. He shook her hand warmly before escorting her to the center of the platform. The applause continued. Ryan remained seated, trying to reconcile two completely different versions of Charlotte. The woman he remembered and the woman standing under the spotlight no longer seemed like the same person. Vanessa looked around the room desperately searching for an explanation. Instead, she found something far worse. Respect. Everywhere she looked, influential people were smiling at Charlotte with genuine admiration. For the first time that evening, Vanessa realized this recognition was not spontaneous. These people had been waiting for this moment. They already knew. And somehow she and Ryan had been the last people in the ballroom to understand that Charlotte Bennett was not attending as a forgotten guest. She had arrived as someone the room had been waiting to honor. Charlotte stood beside Jonathan Hayes while the applause slowly faded. The spotlight remained fixed on her, yet she looked more comfortable than many of the executives seated in the front row. Jonathan smiled and waited for the room to settle completely before speaking again. Most people know only a small part of this story, he said. Tonight is not simply about generosity. It is about vision, leadership, and a commitment to helping others succeed. The audience listened carefully. Ryan felt an uncomfortable knot tightening in his chest. He had expected the recognition to end after the announcement. A major donor. A generous supporter. That alone would have been surprising enough. But Jonathan's tone suggested something much bigger was coming. Vanessa sensed it too. Her confidence had vanished entirely. Jonathan turned toward Charlotte. 3 years ago, Ms. Bennett began supporting several of our most important initiatives. What very few people realize is that her involvement extended far beyond charitable contributions. A large screen behind the stage illuminated with photographs of community centers, educational programs, and small business grants. Images changed one after another as Jonathan continued speaking. Many of these programs were not merely funded by Charlotte Bennett. They were designed with her guidance. Several of the strategies that allowed these projects to expand nationwide came directly from her recommendations. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Business leaders exchanged surprised looks. This was no longer the story of a quiet donor writing checks behind the scenes. This was the story of someone actively shaping outcomes. Jonathan allowed the audience a moment to absorb the information before continuing. However, there is another reason we asked Ms. Bennett to join us tonight. The room became silent again. Charlotte herself looked slightly surprised. Jonathan smiled. Because this morning, a transaction was finalized that will influence the future of this foundation and several organizations connected to it. Ryan leaned forward in his chair. Every instinct told him he was not going to like what he heard next. Jonathan glanced towards several board members seated near the stage. They nodded. After months of negotiations, Bennett Strategic Holdings completed its acquisition of Northstar Capital Partners. The name immediately captured the attention of nearly every executive in the room. Northstar Capital Partners was one of the most influential investment groups connected to multiple philanthropic and corporate ventures throughout the country. Vanessa stared at the stage in disbelief. Ryan's expression hardened. He knew exactly how important that company was. Jonathan continued. As a result of that acquisition, Ms. Bennett now serves as majority owner and chairwoman of the organization. Audible gasps spread through the ballroom. Charlotte remained calm, but inside she finally understood why so many people had approached her throughout the evening. The acquisition had closed earlier than expected. News had already circulated among senior executives before becoming public knowledge. Jonathan's next words landed even harder. Several companies represented in this room now fall under partnerships, investment agreements, or strategic relationships connected to Ms. Bennett's organization. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. He quickly calculated the implications. Carter Foundation projects. Business relationships. Funding agreements. Corporate partnerships. The connections were suddenly impossible to ignore. Vanessa looked around the ballroom and realized something devastating. The respect Charlotte had received all evening had nothing to do with sympathy, curiosity, or nostalgia. It was earned. Every executive who greeted her had done so because they genuinely valued her influence. And as Charlotte stood beneath the spotlight receiving another wave of applause, Ryan understood a truth he had never considered before. During the years he believed Charlotte had disappeared, she had not been rebuilding her life. She had been building something far larger than anyone imagined. The applause continued long after Jonathan Hayes finished speaking. Charlotte stood quietly beneath the lights, accepting the recognition with the same calm dignity that had defined her throughout the evening. She did not celebrate. She did not boast. She simply smiled and thanked the audience. When Jonathan finally offered her the microphone, the ballroom became silent once more. Many expected a triumphant speech. Others expected a dramatic response directed at the people who had underestimated her. Instead, Charlotte spoke for less than 2 minutes. "Thank you," she said warmly. "The truth is that none of us succeed entirely alone. Every opportunity one received came with responsibility. If tonight proves anything, I hope it proves that growth is possible, even when life takes you somewhere you never expected to go." The simplicity of her words made an even stronger impression. There was no bitterness. No score settling. No attempt to embarrass anyone. She thanked the foundation, thanked the volunteers, and thanked the communities whose lives had inspired her work. Then she returned the microphone to Jonathan. The audience responded with another standing ovation. This time, even more people rose to their feet. As Charlotte stepped down from the stage, executives immediately approached her. Conversations began forming around her from every direction. Invitations to meetings. Congratulations. Requests to speak privately. The attention was overwhelming, yet Charlotte handled it gracefully. Across the ballroom, Ryan remained seated. The noise around him seemed distant. For years, he had believed he understood Charlotte. He thought he knew her strengths, her limits, her ambitions. Tonight had exposed how wrong he had been. The woman he once considered predictable had quietly built an empire while the world assumed she had disappeared. Vanessa sat beside him in complete silence. The confidence she carried earlier in the evening had vanished. She could no longer pretend that Charlotte's success was luck or coincidence. Too many respected people admired her. Too many accomplished leaders valued her judgment. Reality had become impossible to ignore. Nearly an hour later, the formal program ended. Guests began moving toward private receptions and networking events throughout the venue. Charlotte spent several minutes speaking with board members before finally making her way toward the exit. She was ready to leave. The evening had answered every question she arrived with. Just before she reached the doors, a familiar voice called her name. She turned and saw Ryan approaching. For a moment neither spoke. The noise of the ballroom faded into the background. Ryan looked older than she remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. As if the weight of several realizations had settled on him all at once. "Charlotte," he said quietly. "I did not know." She smiled gently. "I know." Ryan looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "You built all of this?" Charlotte considered the question. "I built a new life," she answered. "Everything else came after that." Ryan nodded slowly. There were countless things he wanted to say. Apologies. Regrets. Questions. Yet none of them seemed sufficient. Charlotte could see it in his expression. The realization that hurt most was not losing her. It was discovering her value only after everyone else had already recognized it. After a long silence, Ryan finally managed a small smile. "I am happy for you." Charlotte believed he meant it. "Thank you," she replied. Then she extended her hand. Ryan shook it. No anger remained between them. Only distance. The kind created when two people travel in completely different directions for years. Charlotte wished him well and walked toward the exit. Outside, the cool Manhattan air greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Behind her, the gala continued. Ahead of her, the city lights stretched for miles. She looked up once, smiled to herself, and moved forward without looking back.